And good morning, all. Today, a little made-up village with rocks and water. It's a 6x9 sheet of 140-pound Arches cold pressed paper. And my composition is incredibly simple. I'm just using a combination of shapes, rectangles and squares to create my little village. That was a Lamy medium point pen I was using to ink in my structures. Now I flipped the board upside down and I'm using some relatively clean water to paint around the buildings and just have the, just to create a wet sky. I didn't want the paint to run into the buildings. That's why I flipped it upside down. So I dropped in some raw sienna and I'm using cobalt blue. Now, when you flip the board upside down, you don't know what your sky is going to look like until you've obviously flipped it around again and let it dry. So you can't really, create the look you want. You're pretty well just leaving it to chance here when you flip it upside down. But there, I'm just going to mop out what I know is the horizon, just lift a bit of the paint out of there, let it run down, and we'll see what we come up with. So I left it upside down until it dried, and that's what my sky looked like. Not the greatest sky in the world, but I'm hoping the color of the roofs will, make this thing jump out a bit, and people won't focus on the sky. In the background, I'm using some ultramarine blue to create some mountains, just to give this whole thing a bit of depth. So they could be mountains or trees, but anyway, they've run off quite a ways into the distance. That one down at the bottom left there, I just dragged some of the paint down into the water to create a reflection. And again, I mopped out the base of the hills to show some atmosphere and to show, in fact, that they are in the distance. Now, this village focal point is going to be the rocks and the roofs, is what I'm looking for here. So the rocks in the foreground, I just wet the entire area, and I'm dropping in a combination of raw sienna, burnt sienna, and some Payne's gray. And that's a big brush. I got a number 12 round going there, and I just loaded it up, and I'm just dropping all kinds of paint in there just to create, hopefully, some kind of a rock texture. So I didn't fuss with it. I just let the paints in. And then seeing it was so wet, I just dragged the color down a bit to create the reflection in the foreground. Now, it dried quite a bit lighter, so I will be going back in to work on that. Now, my bridge, I'm using the exact same process. I wet the area, and actually I didn't wet the area. I used some really wet Payne's gray to create the background color. And then I dropped in some burnt sienna, some raw sienna, some burnt umber, a whole bunch of colors in there, and even some purple, just to create some interest. And as with the rocks, I just dragged a bit of the paint down into the water area and just put a quick stroke through it to show that, in fact, that it is water and there's a bit of motion in that water in the foreground. Now, as I mentioned, my rocks dried very lightly, and I'm going back in and still fussing with reflections. Oh, my goodness. Okay, I'm going back in and I'm working on that reflection by the looks of it. There we go. So I put that paint in there, trying to create somewhat of a dark foreground because it is relatively close to us. And of course, it dried super light. So once again, I got to get back in there with some paint and have the immediate rocks much darker. So there's the raw sienna and the burnt sienna. And of course, Payne's gray for the darker areas of the rock. Well, there's my like and subscribe. Thanks so much to everybody who's already subscribed. Really appreciate it. And thanks so much for all the comments too. They're really helpful to know about content. And of course, they keep me going too, because they're rather inspiring, some of the comments I get. So thanks again. So this is all, I did some splatter there. Warning, I'm not a good splatter guy, but I tried splatter to create some texture while it was all wet. And seeing as the paint was still quite damp at the front, I put in a rather dense version of my Payne's gray to really darken up that foreground. And again, let it run down into the water. And I'm just etching some lines in there to show some movement in the water. Now, the why I painted the rocks like that is you just blur your eyes then, and the paint actually creates the rock forms for you. So I just got my pencil in there just to mark in roughly where I'm going to ink. And again, these rocks are in the foreground, so I can really put a heck of a lot of detail in if I want. So with the pencil, I just traced around kind of where the paint had run, the edges of the paint. And now I'll just get in there with the Lamy pen and map out the rest of the rocks. Now they look a bit contrived and a bit positioned at this point. So yeah, I'm fussing with it. I'm just putting in some more shadow because it still didn't seem quite dark enough for me. And also I'm working in a very bright window, so I can't really see, get much contrast between the values with all that light hitting the paper. So I'm going in some relatively dark paint, so it's a Payne's gray, and I got some burnt sienna in there. I think I even put in a bit of burnt umber as well. I am going to leave the rocks at the top light, as the light, which I've already decided is coming from the upper right, is going to be hitting those rocks. So I just matched the water in the foreground there with some darker paint to match the rocks that I'd done. And here I tried to splatter again, and I got to work on my splatter technique. So I've stopped fussing with the rocks, and I'm not terribly sure about it at the moment. So I decided to go in and do some shadow work. Given that it's a relatively bright day in my made-up world, I'm using an ultramarine for the shadows. Didn't mix any paints. I could have mixed some Payne's gray, and if I wanted to get really, stick to the rules and make things a little truer to form, but I decided to go straight up ultramarine blue. Bit of a problem with that is it's kind of close to the hills or the hills of the mountains in the background. But I'm not going to worry too much about that right now, because I'm hoping that when I put the roof colors in, that won't jump out at you. So these are little points of interest, little red door in the foreground. My wife says I don't use enough color, so I'm going to have a red door in there, and I'm going to jump right in with the burnt sienna roof. That is a little, a 1/4-inch flat brush I'm using to fill the area. And I'm just dragging the paint down from the top of the roof there, just to show that's where most of the wear will be, at the very top, and dropping in some Payne's gray into the burnt sienna. And I actually put some yellow ochre in the little highlight on the roof there, just to make it a little more interesting and make it appear as if the light is hitting it. This roof was an olive green with the yellow ochre as well. So I put in a nice wet mixture. This is a red one. Nice wet mixture of paint. And I put a little bit of yellow ochre at the top. Again, the light hitting it. Got myself in a bit of a bind here. I started painting in the middle and moving right, so I'm trying to get my hand over the wet roofs to finish the rest of it up. And that was just red and a bit of burnt sienna. So again, it's kind of nice just to put the colors in, really wet, add colors to them. Let the colors mix on the paper rather than in your palette. And I find it comes up that you never get the same effect, and you always have a different look. And I think it makes painting a heck of a lot more interesting. Yeah, it's too dark, so we'll just drop in a few more lights there, and I'm thinking we're good to go here. So one roof way over on the right, we'll just put straight up yellow ochre because the light's hitting that. So now we're pretty well down to the details. and just putting all the finishing touches on this little guy. So it's incredibly simple painting. And I think it looks pretty good. And of course, as I'm doing the windows, I realize I'm going to have to get back in and put some more lines on those rocks because they are just a little too plain. Oh, in the foreground, by the way, I'm using a dry brush and just stroking a bit of cobalt across there, and then mopping out the reflection of that building on the left. So as mentioned, here I am going in with my pen and putting a bunch of cracks and splits and just detailing out those rocks in the immediate foreground. And here's the pastel pencil just to put some highlights on the rocks. I think I kind of overdid that, but still I can use it for the little highlight on the water. And then my X-Acto to just strip out some of the paper to show a bit of motion. Signed it, tape off of this guy, and there you have it. Simple little village with rocks. Thanks so much for watching. And we'll see you again soon.